His bricks were stamped with one of the top status symbols of the era, a Hummer, and he married an even better status symbol, the daughter of Atlanta's mayor. He went from college to Coke King, working with both BMF and their counterpart, aka the other side, the Sin City Mafia, Jerry Davis. He co-owned one of the key components in the entire BMF case, both in regards to actual transportation and a lot of the things we associate with the pop culture part of BMF, the luxury cars. He co-owned the infamous 404 Motorsports. And he wasn't the typical victim of a conspiracy case like Ghost Dope. Yeah, there was a conspiracy, but in the end, when he was taken into custody, he was sitting in a house with 100 bricks and 1.5 million right there. And he's gotten away with double murder, allegedly, according to the prosecutors. His name is Tummaine Kiki Graham, and in 2004, a federal grand jury indicted Graham for his role in a drug ring that smuggled at least 1,000 kilos from Los Angeles to Greenville, to South Carolina. That was just, what they had them on. Who knows how much it was in totality. $20 a kilo or so, maybe they're a little bit more in Greenville. You're talking about, $22 million. Say they're making $4,000 or $5,000 off a brick, so that's $5 million in profit right there. Now, the double homicide, which we'll get into, that he wasn't convicted of, when one of his primary couriers, a guy named Ulysus Hackett, whose own co-workers in the conspiracy nicknamed Stupid. I don't know why you keep working with somebody you nickname Stupid, but when this guy Ulysus Hackett got brought in for questioning, Graham correctly thought he might be planning on talking. Ulysus Hackett and his 24-year-old girlfriend, a recent Spelman graduate, someone went to their house in Atlanta, took to the head of both of them, and while Graham was a prime suspect, there's never been any charges in that case, though it's still looming over their head. But let's go back to the mid-1990s. Tummaine Kiki Graham is a student at Clemson University, which is actually a very prestigious university, very hard to get in, one of the top public institutions. But wherever he was from, Tummaine Graham had a hunger for success that turned into an appetite for destruction. According to testimony in federal court, he began delivering drugs for Jerry J. Rock Davis of the Sin City Mafia while he was still a Clemson student. Sin City is nicknamed after a little town called Phoenix City, Alabama, which is right across the Georgia state line from where Fort Benning, one of America's biggest military bases, is. Back in the 40s and 50s, Phoenix City was such a den of vice. You could get illegal abortions performed. You could buy and sell children. Soldiers would get drugged and robbed by the locals. That it was nicknamed Sin City. And that's where Jerry Davis and his crew was from. And the Sin City Mafia, Jerry Davis, had a lot of the same trappings as BMF, multiple homes in LA, thousands of kilos in their conspiracy. Sin City Mafia was big. Now, actually, when I was doing Frank Matthews, the IRS agent that worked the Frank Matthews case, he worked the Jerry Davis case, but I think not as a prosecution. I think Jerry Davis's lawyer hired him because he was retired IRS at that point for something, and at that time I wasn't making stuff for YouTube, so we just talked about it off the record, and I didn't interview him. Too bad for us. So Tummaine Graham's primary thing was running a thing through UPS and FedEx, or maybe it was just FedEx. He had someone in the FedEx office in Atlanta, so the packages would come from California. They would grab them, so they wouldn't get searched or stolen. And because, if you mail drugs to like certain places, so I've heard, they get stolen frequently because the drivers, depending on who they are, know the patterns of like, oh, where are these people that just get these little boxes from LA all the time? Let me open one. So Kiki Graham's role was logistics, and he was in charge of getting the boxes in. In his testimony as a federal informant, Tummaine's main partner in crime and in 404 Motorsports, Scott King, said he dated Callie Franklin, who was future mayor of Atlanta's daughter, Shirley Franklin's daughter. And one evening, Scott King said he and Graham and the Franklin sisters were all in the same strip club, and he introduced Tummaine Graham to Kai Franklin, and they quickly went on to get married within knowing each other for a couple years. And Kai Franklin, who had graduated from the University of Virginia in '99, worked for her father's company at the airport. He had an airport concession with 3 retail outlets. Her father was also Peebo Bryson's personal manager. So she was working for her dad at the airport, not like his airport worker, but running the businesses. And then in '01, when they got married, she stopped working. And of course, Peebo Bryson sang at their wedding, and Mayor Shirley Franklin was there, so he really married into political royalty, which makes me think back to like maybe he's from one of those kind of families too. I don't know. The new couple bought a $600,000 crib in the ATL Burbs. Kai Franklin listed $120,000 worth of jewelry to their insurance company, and they of course opened 404 Motorsports. Allegedly, some of the money to open 404 Motorsports came from Big Meech. Someone testified in one of the many various BMF trials that $250,000 as part of some payment was loaded up at the White House, one of the stash houses, and sent to 404 Motorsports. And Kiki Graham was eating Christmas dinner, at least for 2 years, over at the mayor's house while he was trafficking on a very large scale. Kai Franklin Graham was eventually charged with money laundering years later. She said she didn't know her husband was a drug dealer, and he explained away his wads of cash, as much as 60 or 70 grand he would bring in at a time, as gambling winnings. The prosecutors simply said, "How couldn't you have known?" A little aside about 404 Motorsports. I actually knew a guy in Detroit who had a car with a 404 Motorsports plate, and he was acting all weirded out about it. And then he got rid of the plate. I think he got rid of the car. And 404 Motorsports was on Cheshire Bridge Road and sold luxury cars, including some of the Ferraris and Lambos seen in famous BMF videos, music videos like Blue Da Vinci and Fabulous. And one of BMF's innovations was using luxury cars and limos to smuggle the dope. So even if Kiki Graham didn't per se move any drugs with BMF, his business, some of the cars he facilitated were used in smuggling. Quote, "In the first couple of months, we did great business at the store and everything was going good," said Scott King, who received a 24-year prison term in exchange for cooperation in the eventual drug case. And then things started taking a turn for the worse, but we wanted to keep the business afloat because of the nature of the business in Atlanta, and we wanted to keep people thinking we were great businessmen. At this point, court records show Graham's ring had accumulated already $10 million in profits. This money, prosecutors say, fueled a streak of acquisitions for the new, for Graham and his new wife, the $650,000 house in Cobb County, bunch of cars, and Graham was traveling regularly to California to oversee drug shipments to Atlanta, and they were getting ready to move there. But then in late '02, Greenville, South Carolina police and the DEA launched an investigation into a local Greenville, South Carolina dealer named Baron Johnson. Within a year, they had a wire up on Baron Johnson's phone. Agents listening in learned that Johnson was getting his coke from Atlanta from a supplier named Scott King, his business partner, 404 Motorsports. Needless to say, it was about to get all bad for Tummaine Graham. Small town big shot Baron Johnson was the first domino to fall when he, along with several of his Greenville, South Carolina associates, were indicted under seal in December of '03. Johnson was quickly apprehended. It didn't take long for investigators to convince him to talk. He arranged a 4-kilo buy from Scott King, and King sent one of the runners to Greenville, as he'd done countless times before. January 21st, '04, King's courier, the Ulysus Hackett guy I mentioned earlier, he shows up with the 4 bricks. The police were waiting, and they pulled the kilos out of an elaborate electronic trap inside. They found another 10 kilos at the stash house, a bunch of cash. stored in underground safes. The feds were able to, I guess, look at the serial numbers of the safes and find the locksmith who'd installed them, and he said, oh, a guy named Tummaine Graham paid for these. And Graham's name was on a lease for one of the houses, and then the investigators were like, okay, this Baron Johnson got cops from Scott King, and this guy Tummaine Graham ordered the safes, and oh, Tummaine Graham and Scott King home for Motorsports together. So just like that, you know, it's hard, once they start looking at you, it's hard to hide the connections that people have. So they knew these two guys were together, and they figure out what they were doing. So it's April of '04, and Tummaine Graham's in L.A. handling some business. And he gets a bad phone call from his wife, Kai, who tells him Scott King's in custody and probably giving information because the Graham house in Cobb County gets ran up in by the feds. And soon after, Graham gets indicted in this big case out of South Carolina that involved Jerry Davis and Scott King and others. And he gets out on a $400,000 bond. While he waited to go on trial, he remained under house arrest in the 5,000 square foot home he shared with his wife in Woodruff Plantation, which is the subdivision they lived in East Cobb County. And there's a lot of places in Atlanta with the word plantation in it. Kind of weird, I noticed when I was down there. The neighbors said they knew nothing about Kiki Graham's drug business or much else about the couple. They didn't socialize with anyone in the neighborhood. When Graham and Franklin had a pool installed, neighbors complained that the couples wouldn't stop workers who tramped on their lawns. Graham and Franklin never seemed to want to follow the rules, Miss Todd said. They were not the ideal neighbors. Even while Graham was under house arrest, he continued to oversee the distribution of drugs from California, according to testimony by another defendant, Eric Rivera. Scott King, his buddy, testified that Graham got worried about Ulysus Hackett, and that's why he intimated he had him killed. So weeks after Ulysus Hackett III and his girlfriend Misty Carter were slain in Atlanta, just before his trial was scheduled to begin in South Carolina, Kiki Graham cut off his ankle monitor and fled to California. Being an excellent decision maker, while Kiki Graham was in California, on the run, he decided to slip his 6'5" frame into a Ferrari and drive around in LA in a Ferrari. And as soon as Kiki disappeared, the mayor's daughter filed for divorce. But the recent testimony and other public records suggest it may have been a divorce on paper only. Franklin and Graham remained in regular contact, according to evidence presented during his sentencing. Graham's co-defendants testified that while he was a fugitive, he sent drug money to Franklin. One bag holding $25,000, another $20,000. She also got portions of $150,000 that Graham invested in her father's business. David Franklin, her father, and Peeble Bryson's former personal manager, testified that an investment never occurred, so that has to be said for the record. In California, Tummaine Graham got a prepaid cell phone to call only his wife, thinking it would be difficult to trace. Scott King said they referred to it as the Kai phone. They would talk about different things like paying bills, he said. He said Franklin regularly sent bills to Graham at a house where he was hiding in suburban LA, and Franklin would pay, or Kiki Graham would pay the bills from there with, of course, money orders. So Kai Franklin would get the cash. He would buy money orders for under $3,000, which violates the federal law of structuring payments to avoid scrutiny, and that's what got her in trouble later. So Kiki was still trying to help her keep up the lifestyle even while he was on the run. After Ulysus Hackett and Misty Carter popped up dead and Graham went on the run, he obviously blew the bond, so they sent a bounty hunter after him who got onto him. Probably wasn't hard, 6'5" guy, and a Ferrari. I mean, there's a few of those in LA, but there ain't that many. And followed him to a house, and the feds ran in, and he was in there, and I think Jerry Davis was in there at the time too. Maybe Jerry Davis got caught in another house, but I think they were together, and there was 100 kilos and like $1.5 million in cash. So this case actually had, drugs and people. So Graham's now in custody. the party's over, he's got to figure out what he's going to do. So he tells him he's going to cooperate in exchange for a 35-year deal. So that's how bad this case was. So remember, like T and Meech, BMF, you know, they signed plea agreements that was a 20 to 30-year range. They, of course, got sentenced at the high end of the range, but Kiki's deal was 35 years with cooperation. But they gave him a polygraph test, and specifically about Kai Franklin's money ordering, he failed the polygraph. And at sentencing, Kiki Graham told the judge, quote, "I'm sorry that my story wasn't embellished or sensationalized enough to the agent's liking, but my plea agreement didn't require that." Regardless, the prosecutors, for that and other factors, revoked their deal, and the judge handed down a maximum sentence, life with no chance for parole. Now, if you look up Kiki Graham in the Bureau of Prisons now, he actually does have an outdate of 2032. Kai Franklin Graham eventually pled guilty to structuring financial transactions in a way that avoided scrutiny from federal authorities, and she agreed to cooperate in what one prosecutor describes, quote, as an ongoing investigation into cocaine trafficking. So Kiki Graham, like I said, he's been resentenced to the year 2032, so he ended up with about a 25-year sentence. His partner in 404 Motorsports and in coke trafficking, his one-time best friend Scott King, because of his cooperation, only got 24 years, which actually, when you think about it, they really kind of got a similar amount of time. And Jerry J. Rock Davis of the Sin City Mafia, who was the one in charge of that whole venture that Kiki Graham was smuggling for, he got 40 years. He didn't do any cooperating. Graham's failed polygraph test about the info he provided was not just about his wife's money laundering. Prosecutors discovered that Graham's version of events contradicted the statements of other witnesses about the Ulysus Hackett and Misty Carter murders. One filing states Graham told Scott King that his associate supplied the gun to murder Ulysus Hackett and his girlfriend. Another person, associate number 2, was seen near Carter's apartment shortly after Hackett and Carter were murdered. And according to Scott King, he and Graham were with that guy when he allegedly did a double murder in Washington, D.C. That's in the BMF book. That's where they were at an All-Star game or something, and they were in a limo and got into it, just an argument on the street, and someone got out and shot 2 people. And the third associate that he lied about in the polygraphs was someone he had a close relationship with, that he was in the drug business with, and those homicides, and he didn't want their name coming up because they probably never got in any trouble. So what exactly was the connection between BMF, Sin City Mafia, and Tummaine Graham? One former BMF member described Flannery as a silent investor in 404 Motorsports, like I said. Then there's the Sin City Mafia. And while BMF, an early version of it anyway, arrived in Atlanta in the 90s by way of Detroit, like I said, Sin City came up out of Phoenix City, and they have already been doing their thing, and they're believed to have moved transacted transactions on a level similar to the Flannery brothers. Members of BMF and the Sin City Mafia hung out at the same houses together, partied at the same places. The Flannery brothers' father, Charles Pops Flannery, actually did some renovation at Jerry Davis's West Side Rap recording studio in Atlanta. And in 05, I think in St. Louis, when one of the BMF guys was surrounded by the DEA, supposedly he called J-Rock, and then someone came up and shot at the DEA. No one's been convicted of that, but that's, was alleged to have happened. So BMF and Sin City weren't rivals. They had their own stuff going on, but they probably worked together at different times. That level, everybody knows each other, and it's not really a competition like that. It's working together to make sure the spice must flow. The South Carolina federal conviction of Jerry Davis and Sin City and Kiki Graham said this: the evidence established Graham as one of Davis's primary distributors, and that Graham and Scott King personally supplied over 500 kilos of cocaine in South Carolina. The evidence showed lavish lifestyles and laundered proceeds of their drug business. All the defendants entered guilty pleas. Graham agreed to cooperate with the government, but lied about a number of associates and failed a polygraph exam. So it just goes to show how big the illegal drug business is in America and the power of the BMF brand, that, you know, Sin City and Kiki Graham were mixed up with them and were doing their own thing at just as big of a scale. But, you know, unless you're really into this stuff, probably people haven't heard of them. I doubt if they're going to be in the BMF show. Close. So that's the story of Tummaine Kiki Graham, who married the mayor's daughter. He had 404 Motorsports. He rocked with Jerry Davis and the Sin City Mafia. Tummaine Kiki Graham, Sin City Mafia, Al Prophet, American Dope.